I have always wanted to get into World of Warcraft, but for a new player, Dragonflight is a complete mess, and one of the worst new player experiences I've had in an MMO. And it's a real shame because World of Warcraft has some standout systems and standout gameplay for a tab targeting MMO. But I think to convey how I feel about the new player experience in World of Warcraft, I need to lead you through our journey. We started off by picking our character, and the choice is vast. 13 classes, most of which have 3 subclasses. That's around 39 class variation. There's a lot of choice here. You can really play out any class fantasy that you have in your head. There's also around 14 races to pick from in 2 different factions, them not sharing most of the races, and a number of race variations on top of this as well that you can unlock in-game by doing challenges and special bits and pieces, which again adds to the variety of what this game has to offer. So I picked a Blood Elf Paladin with the idea of focusing on healing as me and my teammate went through our journey together. Character creation was reasonably basic, but had enough there for me to really flesh out a character that I kind of wanted. And I found the graphics style really appealing. Armor looks great, defined and detailed with some really nice modeling. Though cloth and leather armor's textures did look a little bit iffy, leaving something to be desired. But after character creation, we jumped straight into the game. And we are loaded into a tutorial zone from levels 1 to 10 called Exile's Reach. You do some basic combat tutorials, then you get off the boat, and then you are launched into the starting tutorial zone, with the idea being to get to grips with the basics of the game. You get some starting gear, it teaches you about questing, and it's a really good start. Quest icons, combat feel, boss abilities. So you start getting this idea of the gameplay loop going from quest to quest and leveling up and getting some gear as well. It's a really good introduction. We did have some bugs here and there, which is not something I would have expected from a tutorial zone of a game that's been out for 20 odd years. So that was a pretty big letdown and started to set the bar for some of the things we were going to experience later on in Dragonflight, but generally a pretty good start. At the end of this tutorial, you get an introduction to the dungeon system, and this sets a precedent to how dungeons are going to work in the game. And it is fundamentally flawed, where it does teach you about dungeons, but leaves out / adds in some pieces of information that just aren't right. Firstly, it leaves out dungeon icons from the quest journal. It doesn't show them on the map. It doesn't show a portal like the main game does. So your ability to identify what a dungeon is in the main game is already lacking. It does show you how to pick a dungeon from the dungeon finder, even though some of the implementation is locked out in this specific scenario. And I guess that's to try and make it easier for the player to navigate the menu, but it just ends up leading to a lot of confusion. My teammate who I've been questing with up to this point couldn't join me in the dungeon. It locks out the ability to pick DPS, healer or tank, and this does make sense because the NPCs in the dungeon are going to tank and heal for you, but as someone who wanted to heal, it never explained this to me, and that led to confusion as it locked me out of the role I wanted to play. During the dungeon, it never shows you the raid or dungeon frames that the game has built in. So it doesn't teach you about seeing your other party members, seeing who the tank is, seeing who the healer is, and really solidifies the experience of a dungeon. Also, the edit UI button that they've built into the game, which is fantastic later on, doesn't work during the tutorial sections. So it's not like you can go in and play around with your UI. Now, this makes sense from one standpoint because the game is teaching you where all the buttons are and placements of this, that, and everything else. But on the same side of things, it doesn't explain to you why the edit button is locked, apart from saying you don't have access to this right now. I understand them wanting to teach you the UI bits, but also leaving out fundamental UI for a dungeon or a raid is really bizarre when you're trying to teach a player how the systems work. But by far the biggest issue was the bugs. After I joined the dungeon that I couldn't join with my party, it then loaded me into a dungeon with my party. We had left the group with each other and both hit the dungeon button, and it loaded us both into the same dungeon. So why couldn't I not just join the party with them in the first place? Then as we started progressing the dungeon, the tank and healer just bugged out and stopped progressing, which meant when we got to the first boss fight, we just got slapped in the face and died, and there was nothing we could do about it. We then had to leave the dungeon, which is a process in itself, and then re-queue up. I then found another random player and it led us through the dungeon. At that point, we progressed through the dungeon quite nicely, and when we got to the end, I accidentally hit a taunt button, which is fine, it's my own mistake. But the NPC tank never taunted the boss back, the healer never healed me through the damage, and then I ended up dying quite quickly. Now in hindsight, I actually think this is a good thing. I made a mistake and the game punished me for it. And I like this idea of a game punishing you for making a mistake. It's a learning point. It's a growth point. The tank's not gonna fix your mistakes for you. The healer's not gonna heal you through your errors. You need to learn what buttons do to progress through the fights. My main issue is when the real players are all dead, you're locked out of the boss fight, which is fine, it's a standard MMO mechanic, but then you have to sit there and wait, and a new player may not understand what's actually going on. You have to wait until the NPCs have died, and I think that it needs a trigger to understand, hey, all the players are dead, go jump off the arena, or the boss do a big ability that just kills all the NPCs, so you can get into your new player experience quicker. And at that point, you then restart the fight. I didn't press my taunt button, and we beat the fight very, very quickly. So we finished the dungeon, the boss had a few mechanics, and it got you settled into what a very early on boss in World of Warcraft is going to be like. And then we had to leave the dungeon. Now this was done with an on-screen prompt, and it's not how it's done in a real dungeon in World of Warcraft. And this leads to confusion when you do a real dungeon in World of Warcraft, but that's for a little bit later on in the video. And this was the end of our tutorial zone. We get sent back to Orgrimmar, which is the main city of the Horde faction. I believe that alliance goes to a different city. So you go around the main city with this NPC and he teaches you where things are located. And it's a nice little introduction to the main city and where everything is. You meet the class trainer and the mount trainer. You go to the inn and set up your Hearthstone point, which is like a return point for Final Fantasy players, as well as get your main quest line for Dragonflight. But before we get to that, we ran into even more bugs. During this process, my guided tour guy was swimming around, not walking around, which is extremely unusual. I had issues with equipping gear until I was out of the tutorial. And it's just a few niggling things that once again affect your enjoyment of the experience. Now, as I said earlier, WoW does have a vast array of classes to choose from. And the Paladin class actually has 3 different specializations. You have a choice between a tank, a healer, and a DPS inside of one class. Now in Final Fantasy XIV, you can pick any class at any point and just use your one character to just play any class. But in WoW, you have to level a specific class on a specific character. It's a little bit more embedding your choice. But having those 3 roles inside Paladin is really, really nice. And these are actually hot swappable. With the loadout system, you can pick different specs, you can pick different skills in your skill tree, you can pick different perks. You can even attach armor and gear to specific loadouts, I believe. And it's a really nice way of saying, as a Paladin, oh, we need a DPS, we need a healer, we need a tank, and be able to hot swap between those things. It's a really, really cool compromise inside of World of Warcraft's ecosystem of this is your character and this is their class, but you can still have a lot of maneuverability between different roles. Just inside my little bubble of Paladin, as well as my sort of side visual of what a monk can do with my party member playing a monk, World of Warcraft seems to have a much more unique approach to classes and class design than something like Final Fantasy. In Final Fantasy, classes have similar tool sets for tanks and healers. Healers, there's generally 2 variations across all the healers, shields and healing, and tanks have similar spins on what they can do as well. I think WoW does a better job of not having this extremely homogenized class system inside the game. One of the things with Final Fantasy is it can be a benefit to go from tank to tank to tank and understand what each one does very, very quickly because of that homogenization. But at the same time, they all feel extremely similar. And in my opinion, that is a massive detriment to the class fantasy inside of Final Fantasy. And I don't think World of Warcraft has that same issue. You have demon hunters tanking, you have priests that deal healing via damage. And I think World of Warcraft leans a lot more into the class fantasy of each individual class and spec than something like Final Fantasy does. But we move on to Dragonflight, where we go into the opening quest and we are introduced to a bunch of main characters, people that we're going to see throughout the actual experience. It's a nice setup with knowing what we're doing, where we're going, and generally why. But the level of polish opens up in a very unusual way, where main cutscenes to introduce the expansion aren't lip-synced. The level of polish is really off. It is a theme that we're gonna see replicated again and again and again, especially when not 5 minutes later we're introduced to another 2 characters via a cutscene that is exceptionally well produced. The level of polish and detail is fantastic. The voice acting is brilliant. It made the non-lip synced cutscenes even more jarring to me, knowing that they can pull off an exceptional level of polish and camera work and dialogue, but then in other cutscenes, the whole thing just goes completely out the window. It's in these next cutscenes we're also introduced to the baddie. And it's at this point we're left with a few good questions, a baddie and a location we're traveling to really start off this expansion. So when we arrive in Dragonflight, we start off with some basic questing. And at this point, we're picking up basically every quest like we did in the tutorial zone and just working our way through them, gaining XP, gaining levels, gaining a little bit more of an understanding of the world we're in. And it's very quickly apparent to us that we don't need to do side quests. We're getting more than enough XP from the main story. The main story is generally the beginning of a story, so it's not super intriguing, but it has a level of intrigue there. We're learning about the dragons, we're learning about the Dragon Isles, and we're progressing forward, but we do drop doing side quests because we just feel like they're not very good. Most of them are, can you do this random task for us? And we don't need the XP from them. And at that point, I find myself drawing to some comparisons from Dragonflight to Final Fantasy to Guild Wars and things like this, where in Guild Wars, you want to be completing everything in the zone to progress. In this, you don't have to, so there's a lot less busy work. And the same goes for in Final Fantasy. But the level of polish in Final Fantasy at the beginning of the game is more consistent, where in WoW, the lows of polish are lower, but the highs are higher. So it's quite jarring going back and forth, where Final Fantasy has this mediocre level of polish to begin with, but it is all a progressive line upwards as the game progresses. I'm not sure where we're going in World of Warcraft when it comes down to this level of polish at this time. Is it going to progress upwards? Are we going to get more voiced cutscenes with the beautiful lip syncing and the really nice polish? Or are we going to go and have this same jarring movement of at 1 minute we're getting a great cutscene with some really great voice acting and the next we're getting this weird lip syncing mess? And as we're progressing our characters, skills are becoming more interesting. You're actually investing points into a character, and I feel like the level of investment to a character is a lot higher in World of Warcraft. Final Fantasy just gives you stuff, where World of Warcraft lets you pick stuff. It lets you make decisions about your character and where you'll want to go with it. Now, this may lead to your character being completely useless, but in this level of content, it doesn't really matter. And I've never looked up a guide in World of Warcraft for where I need to spec things into my character, and it's never felt required or necessary to me. And I think this is really good. I'm attached to my character a lot more in World of Warcraft than I was at the same point in Final Fantasy or Guild Wars, because I'm actually investing into my character. Where I am not invested in is the characters that are being portrayed to me. At this moment in the game, I don't care about anyone. And in Final Fantasy, it was a similar story, but there was a couple of characters that I liked spending time with. And that helps progress the story a little bit. When a character you like comes on screen, your energy levels and the enjoyment of the experience increase, where I never had that with Dragonflight. But moving on, and we get to some really cool set pieces in Dragonflights. These massive structures that you can actually walk around and fly around later on that other MMOs just don't have. Again, comparing back to Final Fantasy, the Crystal Tower in Final Fantasy, you cannot fly around, you cannot walk around. It is this visual in the background at all times. Where in World of Warcraft, you don't have that. If there is a castle on the mountainside, you can go to it. If there is a tower in the middle of a field, you can fly to the top of it. It has a scale that other MMORPGs just don't have for whatever reason. And it's at the apex of one of these towers that we're introduced to dragon riding. And I have to say, this is one of the best introductions to a video game system in an MMO I have played. The main story does what it should do and sends you towards the dragon riding trainer. And it's from there you do a couple of quests to introduce you to dragon riding. Basic tutorials, basic flying around. And it's just enough for you to get a taste of dragon riding and how good it feels without being overbearing. It just gives you that carrot on a string effect. And then it also introduces you to a couple of other systems that you can optionally take part in, which are races around the world. And this is exactly how a system should be implemented. The main story, if you enjoy the narrative or not, should be a device to introduce video game systems to you. It should point you in the direction, give you a taste, and then let you carry on if you would like to. And this is exactly what dragon riding does. It gives you the basics, it introduces you to your dragon, and then it says, right, here's a couple of extra things if you want. Now go ahead and carry on with the main story. This is what I would expect for a new player experience. But this is not what you get for dungeons. This is not what you get for raids. This is not what you get for other systems inside World of Warcraft. And now we come down to dungeon discovery on the Dragon Isles. Why the introduction to dungeons in the tutorial does not match the real world examples of an actual dungeon in World of Warcraft. So far the game has taught us that we don't need side quests. They're there to do just like most other MMOs, and that's fine. But I randomly picked up a side quest, and I'm still to this day not sure why. Now, when I picked up this side quest, it had no special markers on it. It had no mention of a dungeon. It just said, go into the ruby life pools and stop the primalist attack. I'm like, all right. Up to this point, the flow of the game has been quests very nicely leading you in this progression line of area to quest to area to quest to area to quest, and it's worked very nicely. So my presumption is that they will lead me to the general area to do this quest. They will lead me to the ruby life pool. And the tutorial of the game set up a narrative where it was going to push me towards the dungeons when the game was ready for it, just like the tutorial did. But after we finished this zone and the area's storyline, with a cutscene that played so abruptly, me and Viper both thought our computers crashed. Okay, I thought my game crashed, then it wasn't, it was a cutscene loading.
Yeah, I thought it crashed as well.
Jesus, talk about jarring. Just another example of the inconsistency of the level of polish you're going to get with World of Warcraft. We then look into our journal and see that we still have this quest for the Ruby Life Pool. But when picking up the quest, It never said it was a dungeon. It never had the dungeon icon on it or anything at all. Now in our dungeon journal, it does have a label saying it's a dungeon, and it says where it is on the map, and it has the icon for the dungeon as well. And this baffled me. Why were these indicators that this is a dungeon quest not on the quest when it was given to the player? Why were these indicators that it's a dungeon not clearly defined on the quest marker above the quest giver's head? It's labeled as a standard side quest, something that we've been skipping because we don't feel like it's necessary. How many dungeons have we missed up to this point? How many dungeons are we going to miss moving forward? It's very, very odd to me that an MMO that has a primary focus on endgame dungeons does not do a better job of introducing the player to the dungeon itself. It was at this moment, though, that we understood that this stroke of luck of picking up a random side quest had led to our introduction to dungeons, the icon for dungeons, the icon on the map for dungeons, and we now knew what to look out for. But when the game had done such a fantastic job with the introduction of dragon riding, it had completely missed the ball on the introduction to dungeons. The training it had given us at the beginning of the game allowed us to know how to interact with the dungeon system, but it didn't give us the information for how we are to find the dungeons in the first place. No icons, no quest markers, nothing. In fact, in a lot of ways, it was completely contradictory to the way that dungeons are actually found in the main game of World of Warcraft. In the tutorial, it's a main quest icon. In the main game, it's side quest icons. In the tutorial, it says use the dungeon finder. In the main quest, it just says go to the Ruby Life Pool. I'm a new player. I don't know what the Ruby Life Pool is. I don't know what these things are. The game needs to do a better job of introducing main mechanics of the MMO to the player. If I hadn't picked up this side quest, how many dungeons would have it taken me to pick up a random side quest to progress the dungeon? And one of the questions I had when we finished Dragonflight was, how many things have I missed when progressing through Dragonflight that the game just didn't do a good job of introducing to me? So we go into the dungeon, we progress nicely. It's a very standard first dungeon of a game. There's a few mechanics for bosses. We didn't really get to see a lot because the bosses died very, very quickly. The mob density was extremely high compared to other MMOs I've played, so that was quite nice. But generally there wasn't a lot I can say on it because it is just a standard first dungeon. It was fine. As our story through Dragonflight continues, we end up finishing this main area of the game and being introduced to the next zone. We move back onto this subject of scale in World of Warcraft. Once again, WoW does it better than most, by quite a large margin. And dragon riding really feels like it belongs in this level of scale. Seamlessly loading from zone to zone, travel to extreme heights as well as fly in between trees. It's akin to more of a single player RPG and what they can pull off than any other MMO that I have played to this point. It really is something that I would love other MMOs to look at and learn from, as being able to explore worlds seamlessly is a pretty big thing when it comes down to the introduction of a world. Games like Witcher and Fallout do this very, very well, where you have large set pieces of unique architecture and design inside the world that you look at in the distance and say, what the hell is that? And it leads you to explore and navigate the world. And World of Warcraft does have a sense of that, something that Final Fantasy just doesn't have because you have to load from zone to zone to zone. I just wish that the narrative of the game up to this point, with the characters that we've been introduced to, Alexstrasza and the other Dragonflights, the bad person that I'm so generic I can't even remember the name of, as well as people's objectives and histories, was introduced in a better way that made me actually care. Characters' desires and objectives and passions are not just not interesting to me, but I feel like they're not even portrayed in a way where I can actually understand and get behind their objectives. At the beginning of Final Fantasy, the bad guys are unbelievably generic, but at least I understood why they were bad guys. At least I had hints of why we were facing them. I understood why the main characters were facing against them and what they stood for and what their passions and desires were in this world. And it's something I can get behind. 7 or 8 hours into Final Fantasy, you don't really care about too many of the characters at that point. We're not talking about the end of a 10-year saga here, but I still understand their objectives and why they are doing the things they are doing. But in World of Warcraft, it's unbelievably flat. We're doing this to save our people. Okay, that's fine, but I want a bit more oomph in the storytelling, in the backgrounds, in the narrative. Alexstrasza never seems to show an ounce of real passion, apart from a consistent level of shock when the bad guy shows up. And that to me leads to me not caring about your characters. World of Warcraft at this point shows 2 fatal flaws. If you're a non-story player, if you're a cutscene skipper, World of Warcraft doesn't introduce its main mechanics well enough for me to want to progress those main mechanics. At this point in the game, there is a high chance that you have missed dungeons, leading to your gameplay loop becoming incredibly generic. The carrot on the string is minimal, and if you're a narrative-focused player, the narrative is nowhere near passionate enough for you to really want to spend time with these characters. As we came to the end of the story arc for the main game of Dragonflight, we run into an inconceivable roadblock in my mind. And quite frankly, if we weren't playing this game for a video series, we would have just left it there. The wind would have been taken out of our sails and we would have just dropped it. So when we came to the climax of the story, we follow Alexstrasza to her conflict with the baddie, and we are told that we cannot progress. At level 40 odd, we are told that we have to hit 70 to continue the story. We are left in a world with characters I don't care about, with a story I can't progress, and with a 30 level grind that I'm not 100% sure how to even start with. At this point, we stopped doing side quests because they were extremely generic, and at the time we thought we didn't need the XP. Dungeons are baseline and fine. We've seen a few okay examples of bosses, but they all died so quickly to an iffy scaling system that we never really got engaged with a fight enough to care. From here then, we remembered that there was a hint of a quest line with a character called Chromie and the Green Dragonfly. So we headed over there to find out if we could pick up a main story quest, but there was none to be found. So we picked up a side quest that we thought was the correct quest line, and it turned out to be one of the better quests of the expansion so far, including voice acting, cutscenes, and narrative that made sense, and an in-depth look into not only just Dragonflight and the Dragon Isles, but the world outside of it as well, as you traveled through time to fix the timeline, learning a little bit more about WoW's history and Azeroth, the planet you are on. And when we came to the end of it, with a few more levels under our belt, it again led to some confusion. Why wasn't this part of the main story? Why was this a side story? This, in my eyes, should really have had a separate quest marker. Maybe not one from main story, but something that elevated it above side quest content. It led us to wonder how much of the side quests really were these more expansive stories. How much of this had we missed? And though I was grateful for the earlier hints towards Chromie, we couldn't remember if there were any more hints like that. And we were left wondering, where do you find these? In this whole journey series, we don't Google anything. We go in with an absolute fresh perspective on the game we are playing and try and play it as the developers intended. And I find myself slightly saddened by the fact that we may have missed more of these really good story beats just because the developers have put this blanket label of side quest on anything that's not main story. So needing many more levels, we decided to jump into dungeons and see not only if we could experience more with the dungeons and maybe find a level of engagement there, but also if we could just grind out the necessary levels to finish the story we had started. So we spent a stream just grinding dungeons over and over and over again. All generic, nothing stand out, bosses dying incredibly quickly, no real challenge. even the pursuit of loot never felt like a grip to us because one, we knew it was going to be replaced in 30 seconds, and two, it was never needed. A loot grind in a game is only as good as the challenge that meets it. It's the same issue that Destiny 2 has. Why would I get loot that I don't need? Why would I care about loot that I don't need? But we pushed on ahead and we got to 70 and we walk up to Alexstrasza and we find out that the story is locked behind a raid. Now, this in itself is an interesting idea, and I do kind of like this idea, but in Final Fantasy, they don't lock main story behind raids because they know not everyone wants to do the raids. That is a fine enough point in itself. But in Destiny, they actually pulled this off extremely well. They locked a main story boss behind a raid. And when that raid was killed, then the actual death of the boss was played out in a player activity that everyone could enjoy. And I think that's a really good way of doing it. But as a raider, having main story locked behind a raid doesn't really bother me. I feel like if the game is going to offer you things like major boss fight sequences, a raid is actually a really good environment to take down a big bad. But it was here we found that due to the way that raids are implemented into World of Warcraft, we couldn't do the raid. Without going and getting 20 odd players, there was no way of us actually doing that raid to find out what happens in the climax of the story. It took us another 20 hours or so to actually find out what happened at the end of this story. And even then, I had to watch a YouTube video to find out. This to me is inconceivable. Locking the fight behind a raid, I understand. Locking the cutscene behind a raid where you can't watch it any other way, to me, is bonkers. So at this point, we're clueless. We're clueless about what has happened. We're clueless on the conclusion. But at 70, we do have a bunch of other quests to progress in what I presume is post-game content updates, patches. So, not knowing how the story finished or where we're going, we decide to carry on with the patches to see if they enlighten us to what happens at the end of the story. And we run into another roadblock. A large majority of the quests are given to you at the same time. They're not given to you in any coherent order. You can play them out in any order. This led to another fundamental issue, which is the incoherent structure of questing and narrative in World of Warcraft. And I use the word incoherent on purpose. There were some patch storylines that made sense on their own, that led through their narrative quite nicely. But we ended up playing through 2 or 3 patches in the completely wrong order. And because we hadn't seen the final cutscene of the main game, there was mainline context for the new bad guy that we just didn't have. It made the final acts of the storyline completely incoherent. We would spend hours on one patch thinking, I have no idea what's going on here, and then move on to another patch and be like, okay, I now understand what happened 4 hours ago, for another storyline to be injected in between 2 other storylines. But the most bizarre thing about this is some questlines were hidden, and to gain access to them, you needed to fulfill a certain prerequisite before you had access to it. It boggles my mind why the patch content is not all set up like this. Why have you got some quest lines that feed into other quest lines that are locked, and then 3 or 4 other quest lines that all link into each other can be played out in any order so that you don't get a coherent storyline? The conclusion I've come to is that some quest lines are developed by one team and others are developed by another team. And there was no coherent way of implementing that team's patch to the game. So they all came up with their own ways of implementing their own style of storytelling. Some patches used a method of locking quests before you fulfilled prerequisites. Some patches played cutscenes through you physically clicking on the play movie button in the quest dialogue. Some quests automatically played cutscenes. Some quests played cutscenes and then you could hear audio from the actual game overlapping with the actual cutscene, so you couldn't hear what was being said anyway. But the worst part about all of this is that the actual narrative that is given to the player in this patch content is the best part of Dragonflight's narrative. The best part of Dragonflight's narrative is completely incoherently given to the player, and it actually miffs me off. Me and Viper both sat down and were talking about this after a stream one day, and we both said that we would be far more willing to continue playing this game if they actually just fixed the coherence of the story. I understand that people don't care about story and they just skip through the whole thing. Some of my best friends play video games like this. But for me, a story and a narrative is an intro to an experience, an intro to a video game. You might not follow it for the next 50 to 1,000 hours, but it starts you off on your journey. And if that intro is not well laid out to new players like myself, then how am I meant to want to keep playing? If we sink in 20 to 30 hours into your video game and we still don't know what's going on, and we still don't know where to go or how to progress, then how are you expecting to grip us for the next 1,000 hours? There's a lot of very valid things said about Final Fantasy making you play the entire story before being able to actually play the game. And I understand that, even if that's not how I want to experience Final Fantasy. But Final Fantasy is at least coherent. Final Fantasy gets its teeth into you, and then you want to play more. Where I just don't feel like that with WoW. Your combat could be top notch, but your scaling system means I can't actually experience if your combat is better or worse. The way that characters level up and you apply skill points and really customize the character to be your own character in WoW means I am so much more invested in my character than in Final Fantasy. But when I can't play out the game because I don't have a clue what's going on / I don't care when I do know what's going on, then why do I want to play that character? At the moment, one of the best things about World of Warcraft is flying around on my mount, and that's not the complete game. I don't know what dungeons I want to play. I don't know how to progress a raid. So even if I had skipped every bit of dialogue and every bit of story in World of Warcraft, I still wouldn't want to play it. But I'm gonna continue playing it because that's what we do here. We sit down and we set ourselves a challenge. And with Dragonflight being finished, we are now on to the War Within. And there is a consistent narrative that I've got from chat and comments and friends about Dragonflight, which is it's bad, don't play it, skip it. The War Within does everything you're talking about so much better. And that may be true, but there's 2 points to that. We play games the way the developers hand us the video game. And the developers put us into Exile's Reach and then put us into Dragonflight. For whatever reason, this is how the developers wanted us to play. So that is how we are playing. And to the second point is before I played Dragonflight, there was this narrative about how Dragonflight was a step in the direction for World of Warcraft. And I just don't see how that's true. So I struggle to believe the comments about War Within. With all this being said, we continue on. We're into War Within now and we're streaming it. So if you like this video or have anything to say about this video, please go to the comment section below and tell me your thoughts. Hit that like button, hit that sub button, and watch out for the streams as we experience War Within and continue our journey in World of Warcraft.